morning, ladies and gentlemen. As you probably know, we have a bit of news for you today. My assistant Fatima has brief biographies of the team leaders that carried out this morning's mission and a chronology of the events which were completed about 1 hour ago. If you have any questions, speak to me or my associates after the briefing. Because of the nature of the mission, we do not have any video feeds for you. However, later this afternoon, we are expecting a statement from His Excellency Sheikh Basama, and we will get that information to you as quickly as we can. For operational security reasons, we will not be taking any questions concerning follow-up operations. I will start by reading a formal statement from Al-Qaeda Central Command Headquarters. 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, 7 p.m. Mecca time. This morning, at 1700 Mecca time, Al-Qaeda and Al-Qaeda coalition forces initiated a series of strikes against Zionist American Axis targets along the strategically important I-95 transportation corridor. The primary objectives were a military command and control headquarters located in Arlington, Virginia, a national leadership complex inside Washington, D.C., and 2 communications and industrial infrastructure targets in the Manhattan district of New York City. The initial targets hit the 2 Manhattan district targets at 8:46 and 9:03 a.m. local time. According to initial reports, the 2 facilities were completely neutralized with no apparent collateral damage outside the designated target zones. The government-controlled broadcasting operations located on the roof of one of the buildings were entirely destroyed, and the transportation node located beneath the 2 surface targets was heavily damaged and put out of action for at least 6 months, effectively degrading regional transportation capabilities by 15 to 20%. The third raid targeted a military command and control facility in Arlington, Virginia. Because of the potential for robust counterforce measures, the flight crew had to make the initial approach flying low with a final turn over water. The crew apparently was unable to visually acquire the target in time to hit it on the first pass. The pilot immediately initiated corrective action and made a second, more successful approach from the north, which hit the target at 9:37 a.m. local time. Unfortunately, the change in direction meant that the designated impact zone, the east-facing headquarters of a group of senior-level terrorist planners, was missed by 75 meters. The terrorists had been on our kill list for more than 6 months, and this was our first clear opportunity to eliminate them. But the terrorists apparently escaped injury and have since fled the scene. However, we believe the terrorist cell's operational effectiveness has been significantly degraded, and plans are going forward to identify the homes and safe houses the terrorists use so that they can be eliminated in the near future. The fourth mission, a leadership decapitation strike aimed at a facility in downtown Washington, failed to reach its target. Word is that the aircraft got off to a late start, lost the element of surprise, and went down short of the target. There are conflicting reports on the actual fate of the mission. To find out exactly what went wrong, we'll have to wait until the National Transportation Safety Board does its investigation and releases the cockpit flight recorder transcriptions. We have time for a few questions. Yes, sir.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the pilots and other people involved in the operation?
Yes. The handout which Fatima has, which she will pass out to you after the briefing, has biographies of the team leaders. I can tell you that the team leaders consisted of an all-volunteer, multi-ethnic squad of 21 members. The aviation crewmen were Egyptians and Saudis. The assault and safety team were made up of young men from Yemen and southern Saudi Arabia. When the young jihadi leaders who came up with this truly innovative plan first approached Al-Qaeda, they were well into the planning stage for a very similar plan. After a feasibility study and a data-driven matrix evaluation, we concluded that the operational plan was sound but needed fine-tuning. We agreed to help with funding, logistical, and technical support so the operation could be right-scaled and right-sized at what we felt was a more meaningful level. Specifically, we helped fund an enhanced pilot training effort and recruited and funded a more robust security outfit. The beefed up security outfit would help in the initial assault phase and would help the onboard commanders in the later plan of defensive actions as the situation developed. While we regret the great sacrifice made by all of the team leaders, initial press reports from the Zionist American press indicate there were more than 5,000 casualties in the 3 target areas that were hit. Even with the failed mission, that results in a target ratio of 200 to 1, well above the success parameters we set out during the planning phase for the mission. I should mention, the mission came in on time and under budget. A real tribute to all the young team leaders that carried out the mission. We could not have done it without them. This was the first mission for all of these young men, and we are very proud of all of you. Next question.
But these were airliners filled with civilians.
You go to war with the Air Force you have. We deeply regret all civilian casualties. As you know, Al-Qaeda has a very limited budget and a very low technological base. 3 years ago, our leadership realized that no matter how brave our soldiers and how just our cause, continuing to pose the Zionist American bombing campaign with rifles and rocket-propelled grenades was a losing proposition. World War II, Korea, the war on Palestine shows that the Zionist Americans will use the air weapon to oppose any opponent too weak to respond in kind. They respect nothing but force. So we at Al-Qaeda needed a strategic plan to find an air weapon system that would counter that. So in preparation for the 1999 Tora Bora Defense Planning Conference, Sheikh Osama ordered the staff to do a technology-driven, proactive reassessment of our strategic air options. The result was the Smart Jihad 2000 report. This called for, among other things, that we develop a next-generation, low-cost, high-impact air weapon system to counter the Zionist American weapons. This would leverage Al-Qaeda's greatest assets, its dedicated corps of citizen soldiers, and its brand recognition among the young jihadi innovators to counter the Zionist American air systems, create a strategic response, level the playing field, and hopefully bring the Zionist Americans to the bargaining table. When a group of young jihadi activists approached us with the Manned Drone Acquisition Program, MDAP for short, we immediately saw the value of this and gave it our full support. This represented exactly the type of system we were looking for. A low-cost, high-impact weapon system that would be inexpensive to acquire and operate and require no modification. Last year, Sheikh Osama issued an order authorizing these young jihadis to procure and deploy 4 aircraft in the initial MDAP operation. We deeply regret all civilian casualties, but in the present environment where our ability to acquire and equip aircraft capable of carrying out such a mission is limited, acquisition of previously identified civilian aircraft was the only option we had.
There were hundreds of civilians on those planes. They were murdered. This is a war crime.
Young lady, I don't think that's a fair characterization. We deeply regret civilian casualties, and as Americans have pointed out for their military representatives, the employment of air-delivered weapons in an economy of force operation inevitably leads to civilian casualties. War is messy. You just have to deal with it. We also recognize that our aircraft strategy inevitably leads to a certain number of people who we know in advance will be civilians. On the same account, the Zionist Americans' plan of targeting our young jihadi leaders' homes with cruise missiles is exactly the same thing. Because of the potential legal issues involved in this mission, we request an opinion from the Al-Qaeda Legal Department. they stated that the potential loss from civilians for this mission, less than 1/4 of 1% of all the civilians in the air of the United States this morning, was an acceptable price to pay under both the Al-Qaeda statutes and the current Geneva Convention protocols, which I'm sure you're aware are not binding in this case, because neither the United States nor Al-Qaeda have ratified those. I'd like to point out that today's mission apparently didn't kill one child. Unlike the typical bombing missions of the United States during World War II, Korea, and Vietnam, not to mention the recent bombing raids in Kosovo and Mogadishu, where the United States sent in a squad of 20 soldiers to capture a local Somali warlord who was in his residential neighborhood. The squad got in trouble, called in support from helicopter gunships, and 500 civilians, mostly women and children, were killed. On to the war crime issue that you brought up. I'm sure that all of you know that the United States takes the position that the criminal court in The Hague has no jurisdiction over any war crimes committed by American soldiers. We believe the United States will understand if we take a similar position regarding potential war crimes committed by our combatants. We promise to carefully investigate any claims of potential crimes committed against Americans by Al-Qaeda combatants under the current rules of war as they apply in this setting. Next question.
But most of the victims on the ground were civilians. How can you justify that?
We beg to differ. Any civilian who died today was located at a legitimate military target. Let's go down the list. Talk about each flight. Talk about MDAP-4 first. Took off from here. We acquired it, became MDAP-4 at this point, and for some reason the pilot continued going west instead of immediately turning around. Came back in, came from the south, as I mentioned, and hit the command control center in Northern Virginia. Now that was clearly a military target. Now, we are aware there were civilians at that were victims of this. However, they're all working in a military facility. We only regret that we only accounted for some low-level operatives, and the senior officials that we wanted got away. The mission that failed. Took off from Newark Airport. It was scheduled to take off at 8:14. It did not take off till 8:42. That was the problem. There were major flight delays at that airport. Went over Pennsylvania, north of Pittsburgh, came back here, and this is where we don't know what happened until we get that report back. Now that mission that failed was a decapitation strike aimed at a national headquarters complex located in Washington, D.C., which is a routine headquarters for the National Leadership Cadre. Political assassinations are against international law. Air attacks, however, as the American press likes to say, with luck will take out some senior officials, are a routine American tactic. Witness Ronald Reagan's attempt to kill Muammar Gaddafi in 1986 by trying to bomb him while he was asleep. Failed. Now, international law, under the American interpretation, say that those attacks are legal. And we think the same thing. Decapitation strikes are legal for America, it's legal for Al-Qaeda. All right, moving on to the next one. MDAP 1 and 2. They both took off from Boston. The first one took off at 7:59. We took over the flight here where it became MDAP 1, came down New York, into New York City. The second flight didn't take off until 8:14, 15 minutes later, and it struck at 9:03, again coming from the south, almost missing the building, but then luckily hitting it exactly where we had planned to. Now those two flights mark the kickoff of our new Anti-Infrastructure Initiative. The strikes had three goals. First, degrade America's ability to wage war by attacking the economic sectors that fund the war on Islam. Second, disrupt the transportation and communication networks that are so vital to the American war effort. Third, divert significant American military resources away from these offensive missions and increase the cost of defending the key infrastructure. Remember, we are simply following methods that were pioneered by the United States Army and Air Force in World War II and Korea. The military waged a total war that devastated entire cities. In Korea, in the winter of 1952, the United States Air Force proudly announced that the last remaining building in Pyongyang, the capital of North Korea, a city of 300,000, had been destroyed. That hardly conflicts with the United States' claim in every war that their only targets are military and industrial. More recently, public pressure has made this type of attack of total devastation virtually impossible. But the United States Air Force will continue to do whatever it feels is necessary. We believe the attacks in New York City fall well within the guidelines used by the American military. 2 years ago, in 1999, the Americans had threatened to attack Serbia. The Serbian response was to deploy its well-trained army into the countryside and say, "Come and get us." America, unwilling to risk its young men in a fair fight with the Serbian army, targeted the infrastructure, the civilian infrastructure of Serbia, under the justification that the infrastructure was dual use, used by both civilians and the military. They then proceeded to take out all the important bridges in the country and destroy the entire electrical system, water supply, and sewer system. Next, they targeted the buildings, the government buildings in the capital, just as we did today in Washington, D.C. The United States next declared that the TV stations in Serbia were legitimate military targets because, quote, "they are being used as a propaganda tool by the Milosevic government." After they destroyed the TV stations, the Chinese government allowed Serbia to use its direct link to Greece so that the video of the devastation could get out to the international media. A few days later, the United States Air Force accidentally sent cruise missiles 40 feet underneath the Chinese embassy, killing 3 Chinese diplomats and cutting off Serbia's final video link to the outside world. Please note, the World Trade Center had television transmission facilities on the roof. This made that building a high priority target because they were disseminating Zionist America propaganda. By your own rules of engagement, that made them a legitimate military target. Now, shutting down the World Trade Center was a 2-plane mission, which was designed to accomplish the same thing as the 1,000-plane war on Serbia, disrupting the country's economy and imposing such a high cost on the local population that they would be brought to the bargaining table. This type of war, destroying the country's economy, had been a routine American tactic since World War II. Your problem is Al-Qaeda refuses to present an easy-to-hit target that you can retaliate against. That's your problem, not ours. I'd like to take more questions, but I see our time is running out. And I'm also told there are indications that this building may be on the U.S. target list. Let me say one more thing. We admit freely that our air units lack the technological resources that these Americans used in Serbia. But we had to use the units of a lower technology because that's what we had available. We're doing our best. After every mission, including this one, we will do a review, and the commanders and the crew will learn what they can from it. But I don't think there will be any sweeping changes. We cannot and will not take legitimate targets off the list. Now, some of you asked about doing interviews with our volunteers. We'll be glad to interview any volunteers, any press with jihadi volunteers. Please pack light. Food and lodging will be available for a modest per diem. Before you go, we highly recommend you go to our website and download the latest list of vaccination requirements. A couple of you asked about being embedded in an Al-Qaeda air combat mission. Be aware that the psychological and physical recruitment and training for those are quite strenuous. Also, the flights are a very short duration, so you will have a limited window in order to upload your footage. If you're still interested in that, please fill out the embed request form and start filling out the application form, which I'm sorry to say is quite extensive. Thank you for your cooperation. Any questions on that? All right, thank you for your cooperation. We will be in touch as soon as we have the next briefing arranged.